Okay, let's call to order the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. We'll begin with a roll call. Angela?
Peter Bragdon.
Here.
Andrew Poulos.
Here.
Susan Gary. Here. Joe Gagne.
Here.
Ross Carey.
Here.
President Schill.
Here.
Okay, thank you. First order is actually reviewing or discussing any changes anybody sees to the minutes of the March 2017. The minutes were previously distributed. We didn't get any comments back. Any comments today? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Now, Jamie, we do have a hard stop, so we're going to have to try to accelerate. We've got lunches at noon with staff, so we're going to try to meet that 12 deadline to finish the committee meeting. First order of business is actually a recommendation to rename Cedar Hall, previously Dunn Hall, to Unthank Hall, and turn this over to President Schill.
Sure. So, and I'd like to invite Councilman Greg Evans up, who is co-chair of the committee, just to make some comments also. But just to give you some background, as all of you remember, thanks to the good work of the Black Student Task Force and the administration, we came together with a proposal last fall to take the name of Frederick Dunn off of Dunn Hall, rename it Cedar Hall. As you remember, Dunn was a member of the Grand Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan in Lane County. You voted to do that. We then convened after that a student faculty committee chaired by Carlin Schreck and by Councilman Evans to come up with names, a recommendation to me of 4 names, and they did. We had some wonderful names, and I met with them. I ended up reading through the recommendation, meeting with the committee. I decided to recommend to you today to rename Cedar Hall Honorable Unthank Junior Hall. I think it'll be called Unthank Hall. And he was just a brief biography, and then I'd like to ask Councilman Evans if he has anything he'd like to add. Class of 1951, AAA. Many of you know Mackenzie Hall used to be the law school building. He designed Mackenzie Hall, designed a number of other buildings around the state, and including in Eugene. He was an active advocate for minority communities both in Eugene as well as throughout the state. He also was very engaged with civic organizations, particularly in the area, which is quite meaningful to me, of low and moderate income housing, and worked with Albina Housing as well as Mount Olive Baptist Church. He was actually a faculty member here for 8 years in the 1970s, and from everyone I spoke with, both in the committee and in the community, there was just a lot of enthusiasm and pleasure with regard to our being able to name this building after Honorable Unthank Jr. And our hope is that this will not by any means be the only building that we name after an African American person on campus or other person from an underrepresented minority group. That this is a move that will be empowering to our students, to our faculty, and our staff, and show that we mean business when we say that there's no room here for hate, no room here for prejudice, and only room for inclusion. And if I could, Councilman Evans, if you have anything you'd like to add about the committee or about Honorable Unthank Jr., anything you'd like.
Thank you, President Schill, and I'd like to thank the members of the Board of Trustees this morning. I think you summed it up very well. We had a very enthusiastic, robust committee with robust discussions about names that were recommended to us, names that were brought in to us in terms of African Americans who could represent the values of the university. And this was not in a symbolic way. I want to point out that this naming is a legacy. It's a legacy for the university. It's a legacy for the community. It's a legacy for our students. I am the father of a 2015 grad, and you're still in my pocket a little bit too. But, so he is as well, but that's okay. But he has a degree from the University of Oregon. And when I talked to my son about this, he was really ecstatic, as well as all of my children and many members of the community. When I came to Eugene almost 32 years ago, one of the first people I met was DeNorville Unthank Jr. We called him D. And we had many times where we shared meals, a couple of beers or two over at Max's and Rennie's. But he was an incredible individual, a quiet leader. His father got all the accolades for many of the things that he did to advance diversity, inclusion, and civil rights in Portland. But when Dee came here in the late 40s, early 50s, he did not come here straight from Portland. He came here through, his father originally sent him to Howard University in Washington, D.C. But Dee wanted to come here. He wanted to come to the University of Oregon. He wanted to be an architect, and he felt this was the best place for him. And he felt that this was his home. And so he made Eugene and the University of Oregon his home for more than 50 years. And as President Schill clearly outlined his accomplishments, what he did in the community, what he did to create affordable housing in Portland, the buildings that he designed in Central Oregon, at Central Oregon Community College, Thurston High School here in Eugene, Kennedy Middle School, as well as Mackenzie Hall, has left an indelible mark, throughout this community and throughout this state. And so I'm very proud that of the recommendation that President Schill is making to you today, and I hope you affirm that recommendation because I think it is a major step in the right direction. Dee was an athlete. People don't know that. And originally, one of the things he came here for was football, but he decided not to play football. He wanted to be an academic, he wanted to be a professional, and he wanted to move on with his career and his life in that vein. And that's what he did. And so he made a way for all of us. And my final comment is this. Originally, I didn't intend to stay here when I moved here from Ohio. My original mission was that I was going to move to the West Coast, but I was going to go to California. And I had a friend of mine, Chuck Dalton, who went to school here at the U of O. I came out and visited him, and I met Dee Unthank, I met Ed Coleman, I met a number of people here, and Dee is a large part of the reason why I decided to stay here, why I decided to have my family here, and why I'm exceedingly proud to say that while I was born a Buckeye, I am an Oregonian.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for providing all the materials to support it. Very good reading.
I love having the Unthank name on there because I think we get two for the price of one because his father and mother were equally remarkable, so what a tough decision. So let's just sort of have the junior senior there and we get them both. Thanks, Greg.
Only question, and this is just a point because I don't know, do we have any other buildings on campus that are named for African Americans?
No, this is the first.
I
This, so
don't
this
think
is
the
this
first.
would be a very big moment then.
Yes.
I don't want to underplay that,
Yeah.
the importance of that, what that would mean.
Okay.
And it's not lost on our students who, I don't see them here today, they're probably getting ready for exams, but they've been, I'll talk a little bit in the President's report about where we are on some of the issues that the Black Student Task Force brought up, but this was one of their principal requests.
Okay.
Just a quick comment. I just wanted to say I really appreciated your words and your words, President Schill. And obviously in Portland, the Unthank family is just one of those families that's a standout group of individuals. And I think we really want to continue to honor his legacy, not only in naming this building, but his legacy in the architectural school. Mm-hmm. So I think we want to really highlight the importance that he was as a member and graduate of that school, and hopefully leverage that to help recruit more people of color into that school, because I think we really want to honor his legacy. It's not only naming a building after him, but helping to get more individuals to be aware of the great work that he did, the great buildings that he designed throughout the state, and really what Oregon is, because I think if we do that, not only will his name live on forever on a building, but his legacy will live on forever through getting more and more individuals like him to be interested in our program. So I hope that we take this moment, help leverage it, and just find more ways to honor the good work that he did.
And there's a scholarship fund in AAA, and I would imagine that they would be very happy to have that increase.
This is an action item, so we need a motion to approve.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is just a quarterly report for finance and treasury. I don't know if Karen is going to hobble up to the...
I think I'm going to take the lead, and then when you all ask me difficult questions, I'm going to turn to Karen. So I'm going to try to do this a little bit more quickly, although I am very open if you have questions. The main thing I wanted to highlight for everyone is we have put together a new summary report that we're hoping will serve as a dashboard and help you to quickly assess where we are. And so I thought I'd walk through that in more detail today, so then going forward, you have a sense of how we've set this up. And if this isn't meeting your needs in terms of information, just let me know, and we're obviously very open to feedback. So page, my packet, it says 25, but hopefully you can see it. It's in your docket. You should see the two pie charts. There's a two-page summary in front of the quarterly report. The first page at the top gives you kind of a sources and uses look of all of the revenue for the entire institution. So I want to be clear that this is an all funds perspective. The pie chart on the left gives you a sense of where our revenue is coming from, and I think the main point I'd make, which the rating agencies often make when they talk with us, is that we do have very diversified revenue streams. So while we do get a significant portion of our total budget from tuition and fees, you'll see grants and contracts revenue, state appropriation, as well as other sources of revenue. And then on the right-hand side, you do have the expenses. You're going to see some expenses that you typically don't see in the E&G fund, like depreciation, and that's because our capital assets are carried in our plant funds.
I sure like this chart.
So I hope that helps in terms of the big picture. So again, key thing to think about is this first page. The chart that you're looking at is all funds, so it would be all columns on that total report that we give you. The bottom of the first page is just a very quick snapshot of some of the typical Treasury information. What you can see on the bottom is basically a layout of our projected debt payments based on our existing bond issuances. The upper right-hand corner, we have a breakdown of our assets and how they're invested today. And then finally, Karen's added some points here just to make you aware of key things that have happened in the last quarter. And our thinking is, just like past quarters, we'll continue to give you this written snapshot, and then Karen will do a more robust annual presentation each year. And then obviously anytime we're going to propose issuing debt, we would come towards you. to you for that. A couple of notes on the key points I'd make. We have transferred funds over to the foundation for their management, so that happened at the end of the quarter. We've also been working with the state. The state has issued some of the debt that is for some of the buildings that we got legislatively approved, so that funding is now coming in. And then finally, I will talk about this when I talk about our kind of cost savings initiatives, but Karen and her team have been working with the state to refinance some of the legacy debt that ran through the state. And so we are seeing some savings related to refinancing some of that older debt that was put in place through the state. And so those steps have taken place. If you flip the page, then the second page of the summary report is focused on the E&G fund. And so what we've given you here are two things. One is you've got your pie charts on the top that show the sources and uses of funds. A couple things I'll point out that I think kind of pop more in the pie chart format than maybe when you look at the numbers. If you look at the revenue, you can see how considerable an amount the non-resident undergrad tuition is to our funding. We've talked about that quite a bit, even though we actually have fewer non-resident students than resident students because of the pricing differential. We are just very, very reliant on that stream that's helping to fund the institution. And I think that comes out in the pie chart even more than when you just look at the numbers in the Excel spreadsheet. On the right-hand side, you can see then the breakdown. And again, if you look at the different elements, everything that's labeled OPE is some type of benefits. You can see how salaries and OPE are over 80% of our spending in this fund group. So again, just kind of a high-level view of the sources and uses. And then the final thing that we added to this dashboard was trying to give you kind of a snapshot on some of the key elements in the E&G fund report so you can see where things are tracking versus last quarter's projections. So on the bottom here, for example, and I will just briefly run through these, state appropriation, we're on track. On track just means that we're currently in line with last quarter's projections. There's been no significant change. When we move down to tuition and fees, we are actually reducing our projections. So if you recall, last quarter we had a reduction in our tuition and fee projections. We do have a further reduction to the end of the year. It's about $3.4 million. That is mainly due to us seeing non-resident student credit hours drop. And while it is across the board, there is a bigger component of that is associated with our international students. We did see two trends related to international students this year. One trend is that we often see many of those students come in the fall. Many of them go home for the winter term and often stay winter term at home, where sometimes they have holidays and other things in their home countries, and then come back in the spring, and often then come spring and summer. We did see a lower retention rate in terms of students coming back in the spring, so that did impact our projections. The other issue that we observed, which was a positive issue, was we saw higher graduation rates for international students. We actually saw significantly higher rates in the fall and the winter where they must have finished up some classes and then graduated. And since they did that at a higher rate, that's a great thing academically, but then it means they're not here in the spring. So that there were those two factors that, again, were a good chunk, but not all of this in terms of the drop that we saw. The other thing that might come out as a little bit of an anomaly that I just referenced so that in case you wonder, we have a category called other revenue. It generally doesn't have a lot of revenue coming in. We were in negotiations regarding one of our housing facilities, the Global Scholars Hall. We did successfully complete that negotiation. We received funds from that negotiation. You'll see the settlement funds come in through other revenue. The bulk of that is then being transferred out to plant funds to deal with construction issues. So it's kind of a pass-through in the financials, but it looks like, wow, you got a big jump in revenue, and then you had a big jump in expense. And I just wanted to highlight for folks that that's what that was related to. On the expense side, we actually are managing to stay stay balanced, even though we have had reduced revenue. That's mainly because on the salaries and wages, we are continuing to see those at much lower levels than what we have historically experienced in terms of increases. So we are lowering our projections. I would attribute this to units tightening up. We did put a message out to campus earlier this year where we said, we being the president, but I'll just use the royal we, basically said, look, we know we're heading into cuts. If you have positions that you don't absolutely have to fill at this moment in time, you might want to delay filling it, because then when we get to cuts, you'll have more options for cuts that might not involve an actual person in a position versus an open vacancy. And so we are seeing those rates of vacancies running higher than what we normally would see across the institution. I do have one correction I need to make, which is we did put in here that there was reduced stipend and overload pay. That actually should have said reduced other pay, which is one-time pay. And that's kind of a complicated issue, which is a couple years ago we gave out some one-time pay associated with one of our labor contracts. We didn't do this year, and so there was a reduction. Again, the reduction in our salary and wage expense is what's holding us balanced then, because we saw this reduction on the revenue side as well. Other just quick things, our supplies and services are slightly up. This is mainly due to an accounting change where within one of our units, but there is a slight increase in terms of S&S spend. And then finally, the transfers, as I mentioned earlier, are up significantly, and that has to do with this Global Scholars Hall settlement that we received, that the bulk of which is being moved over to plant funds for capital projects. At the end of the day, we're basically in a very similar place to where we were last quarter. The E&G fund is, the ending fund balance is slightly up. The one thing I will note, which I mentioned earlier in the report that Brad gave, is that while it is slightly up, we are continuing to see increased commitments to our science faculty through startup funds. Those aren't separated out in here, and so those need to be accommodated with that slight increase in terms of the E&G fund. So just to give you an overall, the big picture, if I were to try to summarize it very quickly, would be our revenue projections are slightly down on the tuition side, but our expenses have also come down on the salary side, and that's essentially balancing things out for the E&G fund.
Any other question?
Yeah.
Just going back to the international piece, I'm just making some assumptions of why that return rate might be lower, but here's what, and maybe this isn't the time to ask, but what data we have about that, either countries that are affected and why we think that's happening.
Yeah, I don't know who's in the audience today. There's not too many people in the audience today. I can try to.
Obviously, it's happening at some other institutions.
Yeah, I think it's fair and accurate to say, and I'll try to stay with things that I'm confident are fair and accurate, that institutions across the country are worried with the political climate related to immigration and other issues, what the impact is on students, and that the issues we're facing I don't think are unique to the University of Oregon. I'm not in the best position to probably give more data than that. Mike, you look like you might have something you want to add, or?
I don't have anything to add. I think we see the same sorts of pressures with our international students, and I think that's where a lot of the issue right now is, and it's where some of the uncertainty about next year is going to be.
Yeah. And just to be clear, we do have when we look at our student population, and this was a conscious programmatic decision that was made many years ago, I believe our population is sitting at about 9% of our students. So we have a significant number of international students that are part of our community, and if there are significant changes, it would affect us financially, it would affect us academically, it would affect us socially in terms of the makeup of the student body. So,
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the next item, just as a preface, you remember when we went through the tuition and fees discussion and approval process, in spite of the large tuition increase, it still required that we institute about a $9 million budget cut to make revenue and expense balance. Had we not succeeded with the HEC and had to reduce that resident tuition to below 5% increase, we would have had to have cut another $6 million. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that, but we still have to achieve the $9 million budget cut to make the 2017-18 budget balance. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Jamie and talk about the progress we're making on identifying those.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just introduce it, and then Jamie can run through the numbers, as you said. So we started out with the tuition increase, the amount that we said was going to be a $9 million reduction. We have already announced $4.5 million. It looks like it's going to be $4.6 million of cuts that we've taken, including a 1% cut across each of the administrative units. And each vice president is going to decide and is coming to me I have meetings several times a week as to how they're going to reduce their budget. This is on top of a 2% cut last year And as Jamie indicated to you, we think we're about 61% administrative compared to administrative staffing levels or expenditure levels compared to our peer schools. So we're already start in quite a lean position. And so this is quite painful to some in parts of the university, but nonetheless, we need to do it. We have the other places that we're cutting are, we had a graduation assistance program, which we started when the state provided us with more money. We ran it for 2 years. I think the results were, we weren't clear whether it was having the impact that we wanted it to have, so we reduced funding on that. We also, we had a strategic budget, a strategic initiatives process, which we reduced that or eliminated that for this year. And then in addition to that, Jamie has, I guess it's called sweeping interest. So many of the auxiliaries, they had money that was sitting and earning interest. We used to allocate that interest back to the individual auxiliaries. We swept it for part of the budget cut. So that gets us to something like $4.6 million. We still have an additional $4.4 million $4.4 million that we need to cut. I've handled a faculty student administrator committee. We've been going over options and discussions about what we want to do, and then what we're also doing is breaking up into smaller subgroups. Everything is on the table. Actually, that's where we start. We start talking about what should be off the table. And I have to be honest, when it looked like we were not going to get the increase in our tuition, a lot more was on the table in my mind than is right now. My goal in this process, and I've been fairly transparent about it, is to protect the academic programs in the university. So someone at a meeting yesterday, these meetings are confidential, so I won't say who, but and the entire Senate Budget Committee is on this working group, likened it to a dart game, and the bullseye is our academic mission. And so the closer you get to the bullseye, the more protected you are. The farther you get away from the academic mission of the school, the more likely you are to be part of that $4.4 million cut. And so we're now going through that analysis. Because we don't know what the state budget is going to be, what our allocation is going to be, we're waiting until after the state budget, which will be no later than July 10th, to make those decisions. There's a lot of uncertainty, both with regard to what happens with the state, but also what happens with enrollment. So that number, that 4.4, could go up if we see enrollment declines. On the other hand, if we do better in enrollment, it could go down. And so it's a moving target that we have to be sensitive to. One thing that I'm going to now turn this over to Jamie to both fill in any gaps of what I said about our cuts, but one thing I'm really very proud about, and I don't know if proud's the right word, but one thing that we don't talk about a lot here is what we're doing to achieve efficiencies. And so Jamie's put together a very detailed report about what we've done to achieve operational efficiencies. Last year, you may remember I said what we were going to do is we were going to we were going to achieve savings of about 3%, 1 to 3%. In addition to the 2% actual cuts, we would try to achieve 3% on operational efficiencies. And, at the time, I really didn't know where they would come from, but we all think we can get more efficient. We heard that today. There's still ways to go. But one of the things that I'm really very pleased about is Jamie and the people that work with Jamie have really done an amazing job. And also Kevin's group, and Kevin has taken over. Where's Kevin? Is he still here? Yeah, there you go. So purchasing contracts, they have jumped into this with a gusto that is really wonderful. to really find ways of achieving efficiencies to make us stronger. And some of the numbers are really very impressive. And so what I'd like to do is make sure Jamie has the time to take us through that. She's done it. It's a really good presentation, which I think will be impressive. Jamie?
Great. So the only thing I'd add, Mike did everything I was going to say, which is terrific. Now I don't have to say it. The only thing I'd add to what he shared is just to put the numbers in context. If you remember, last year we cut about $6.3 million from expenditures of the university. That was a $3 million cut on the administrative side, and then CAS, as part of their alignment process, cut a little over $3 million. That did affect close to 130 positions. It's very hard with our budget being so labor intensive to have significant cuts and not affect positions. And then, as the president said, we're working on another set of cuts that are in the range of 8.8 million or 9 million on the institutional side, and then we also have schools and colleges that are continuing to work on their budgets. So we do have a lot of incredibly difficult work going on right now to try to figure out, how do we operate more effectively and more efficiently. What I'm going to share with you is actually a lot of the work that we've tried to do that doesn't as much affect people, but looks at all the other things that we possibly could be more efficient on, and looks at ways to try to improve that. And we've been doing this work for several years, and I want to say up front, a lot of this is in my portfolio, but some of this isn't. It's work going on across the institution, and I am confident that there's stuff going on right now that I did not capture in this slide because I don't even know about it. Because what's happening in a lot of the things I'm going to show you were not top-down initiatives. They were staff figuring out that we could do things better. And so, a lot of the credit goes to the staff in terms of different groups of people that are just trying to figure out how do we operate as effectively and efficiently as possible. So with that caveat that there's probably something missing, what I wanted to do is give you a snapshot update. So the way I've structured this presentation is to break it down so that things that I think you'd think of as more traditionally kind of cost savings initiatives are grouped into several different areas. We have purchasing, utilities, property and insurance, treasury operations, restructuring. None of these are very sexy topics, at least to me, but they're all the things that are, where we spend money that are outside of people, where we could potentially have savings. We do have some other initiatives that have helped us with our E&G finances that aren't exactly cost savings. And so as we were prepping this and discussing it at a management level, we wanted to share that with you, but I wanted to break it apart so that you can see what they are. They're not exactly cost savings, and you'll see what I mean by this. But we have other ways that we've positively impacted our E&G funds. And then finally, I do have a summary of the budget cuts in addition to this. Okay, one of the challenges that we faced as we started to pull all this information together is there really are initiatives in two broad groups. There's initiatives where we really have completed the initiative already, and we're already seeing the cost savings. They're already incorporated into our budgets, or we're in the process of seeing them. Those are going to be labeled blue. We have other things that we are much earlier in terms of our implementation, and so I've labeled those this kind of peachish orange color so that you know that is still in progress. It's not yet done, but it's planned. So I'm going to start with strategic purchasing, and I want to say at the onset, this is an area of amazing opportunity for us. I know that you're pretty aware, we've been talking about it today. We have operated historically on an unbelievably decentralized basis, meaning you have tons of people out. Our culture has been independent units can purchase whatever they want as long as it has a legitimate business purpose, that they are not restricted in terms of which pencils they buy or which paper or which computers, all those types of things. We've had a culture that's allowed people to make those decisions at the local level. While that gives you a lot of autonomy, it's not the best way to leverage your scale as a large organization. And so we are trying, and we are successfully starting to change that culture. But I want to say up front, this is a big cultural shift for us. And there are some people not happy with this because it's different. But if we're going to get the kind of savings we need to move in this direction. The first project that we actually embarked on this started a number of years ago. And I know some people you're going to shake your heads when I describe the way we used to operate, but this is a great example. We have out in the departments hundreds of multifunctional printer copier machines. And literally until a couple years ago, if a unit wanted one of these machines, they would go out and whoever in their unit felt most qualified would go and negotiate a contract independently for their individual machine with some third-party vendor that obviously knows a lot more about the technology than they do. And they'd spend weeks, I did this when I was at the law school, negotiating these contracts, and then we had individual contracts for each machine or set of machines at the university. It's a little bit crazy when you think about it. So a number of years ago, we started a project. We actually did bring a consultant in to help us. We inventoried all the machines. We did an RFQ process. We worked through our printing and mailing unit, and we basically put in place one contract that was for all machines on campus. And essentially, we told departments, you need to be part of this contract. This is, you can't say, oh, I don't want to be part of this, because then that ruins our opportunity to go to the market and offer this consolidated opportunity. What we were able to do is every single department had a machine that was at least as good as the machine they had before in terms of its capabilities. Many departments actually got better machines because they were using machines that we didn't want as part of our fleet. We also were able to go through, and I looked at the spreadsheet, machine by machine. We were able to go through for each department and make sure they weren't paying anything more than what they were paying, and something like 85% of the departments ended up paying less with the new contract. And so in total, even after we've paid for the cost of managing the contract, our estimate is we're saving about $200,000 a year, and everybody's got better equipment, at least as good of equipment or better, and each department's taking part in the benefits of us doing this. So may not seem like rocket science, but it's very different than what we've done at the institution, because we've said to departments, you can't go get whatever machine you want. We have a contract. We have 5 options. You get to pick your option in terms of functionality. We've done that one. We're now moving on to laser printers. So that's the next category that we're attacking in terms of this type of joint purchase. These numbers are probably conservative. I've heard that the savings when we look at laser printers could be much larger than what we saw with the multifunctional machines, but we'll see as we get into it. The one thing I would say is that as we move forward with these types of projects, the goal is to give people a nice suite of options. Obviously, if there's some technical reason why someone needs something that's different, we'll have some type of exception process. So our goal is if a faculty says, I'm doing research and I need a computer that has more capacity or something, there will be a route for those types of exceptions where we need them. But in general, we are trying to leverage the spend of the university to get better pricing overall. We've also been working on this. This is actually something that we're working with HR as well as communications as well as our purchasing and contracting unit. We're looking at our spend on recruitment and advertising for job searches. So again, we had a history where each department would go and they'd individually pay for ads, whether it's with the Register Guard or the Chronicle, other groups. We're trying to look very carefully at what advertising actually makes sense. So when do we need to even do print advertising or online advertising? And then looking at putting university contracts in place. And the estimate is about $75,000 that we should be able to save. The goal is to continue to do this and just keep, with our purchasing and contracting team, which has, as was mentioned, terrific new leadership in place, just keep going after different product categories where it makes sense for us to leverage our spend. We recently, we have a policy advisory council that Angela is very involved with. In general, they're looking at a lot of our policies. In many cases, they're policies we have that we don't necessarily need, and we're taking them off the books. We actually recently put through a policy related to strategic purchasing. It's in the very final stages, if the president hasn't yet signed it, to really put a stake in the ground that this is something we believe is important as an institution to help us manage our funds most appropriately. So we are moving very aggressively in this direction. The other thing we're doing, I mentioned we have new leadership in our purchasing and contracting team. That team is being much more proactive than the department used to be. So the department in the past had been, I think it's fair to say, more focused on compliance issues and processing contracts. What Craig Ashford's done with his team now is to be much more proactive with vendors. So when departments come to purchasing and contracting and say, hey, I have this contract and I have these terms and I'd like to get a contract in place, they're not just taking those terms and accepting them. They're actually going back in cases to the vendor and seeing if we can get better pricing. And what they've been able to document, again, contract by contract, is that in the last, I think it's about 8 months that they've been doing this, we've saved about $1.2 million of commitments over 5 years of just getting better terms, just not accepting what the departments, who again aren't necessarily purchasing experts, have negotiated, but trying to figure out, can we get better terms for the university? So incredible, proactive, strategic work that, again, is flowing back through to all the departments and helping them with their budgets. The final thing I'll highlight here is we're also looking, and this has been a multi-year effort, but to look at how we can do things more streamlined. So purchasing and contracting has launched a new e-procurement, either launched or piloted. Craig is somewhere here. is launching a new e-procurement portal. It's called Duck Depot. The idea is to streamline online purchasing so that there's an opportunity for units to purchase things online more efficiently, and then we're negotiating contracts to put on those portals, again, to direct university spend and get better pricing. So I view this as one of our golden opportunities. I think we've identified some savings. I think with Craig's leadership, we've really pushed the envelope, and to me, there's a lot more here. In a prior life, when I was a consultant, I used to do strategic purchasing projects for Fortune 500 companies, and there are often huge dollar amounts available if you're willing to think strategically and make some choices about how you spend your funds. So this is a great area for us. Second area I want to talk about, again, another... Yep.
I just wanted to highlight one thing about that presentation, which is really the top 2 or 3 items or ways in which we've constrained what folks are purchasing. So, particularly copier or particular laser printer. But what I like the most about some of the PCS work is it's not about what we're purchasing, it's about how we're purchasing it. So trying to overcome some of that cultural shift, people feel like, oh, I can't buy a Mac or I have to buy a PC. That's not the case. It's about how you buy it and where you buy it, and taking the leveraging the purchasing power that we have, given the quantities that we purchase from particular vendors, and trying to drive that business to people who will actually do business with us in a smarter and way that helps us save money.
Yeah.
So really
Good
trying
point.
to get people exactly what they've always had, but with less money.
Yeah.
Question, do you actually have a capital budget by area? You look at dogs and cats, computers and copiers, and of course those are all rentals and they all disappear. But as far as outright purchases, do you have a centralized control, or is it all
No,
centralized?
it's decentralized. So we pass the budgets down to each department administrative unit, and then they have both either a capital or an S&S budget for what they're purchasing. But we don't control those, like I don't control in, architecture whether they're buying computers or not. That is a local decision. What we want to do is when they decide that's their priority, if you think about is how and from whom and for how much, because that's where I think we can really help. But yeah, no, it's...
Do these estimated cost savings include, because it seems to me that if you keep going down this road, you're going to potentially be able to decrease the amount of manpower each department is going to need to do this kind of stuff because you're centralizing it. Do these estimated cost savings include personnel changes or only just the cost of the negotiated contract?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. These do not, I was trying to be very conservative with my numbers, so these are just literally the cost savings. For example, the fleet copier contract is literally just the dollars out the door. There is absolutely savings in the fact that, maybe every 5 years a unit might go through a 2-week negotiation where they have to spend 30 hours or something going into it. There's absolutely savings there. The challenge that we have with that kind of savings is it's usually not a full person. It's usually a piece of somebody. And so we have some other things I'll show you where we're trying to create shared services units to try to capture those kinds of things. But it is difficult with just normal operations because unless that person's literally reducing their FTE and their pay, which is not the case, they're usually doing something else that didn't hit the top of their to-do list, we're not seeing actual dollars out the door. But it does help us in the sense that hopefully over time it means that we won't need to add more staff, and as we consolidate certain functions, it's possible that we may see efficiencies. But I was trying to be very conservative with these numbers because I just wanted to put the conservative side of the estimates down. But it's a great point. It's a great point. Okay, so the next area I'm going to quickly whiz through is the power plant and utilities. We have our own power station on campus. This is another area where we've had terrific new leadership under Tony Hardenberg. And he's come in and with his team been able to make a number of changes that have had very significant impacts on the cost of power for campus. And the cost of power, while it's set up as a service center, a big chunk of that we end up paying out of the E&G fund because it's funding the utilities for academic buildings. One of the things that some of you may remember, because we brought this to at least a subcommittee of the board, is, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, we basically implemented new contracts for long-term gas hedges, and what we were able to do because of market pricing was to renegotiate those contracts and essentially for gas to put in lower pricing for several years that helps hedge our position in terms of the raw power that we're purchasing. And the estimate on that was about $400,000 recurring. Another thing that we've done is we do have a cogeneration system for our power station. When Tony came in, he was really able to take a look at how are we using that system based on different market pricing for both buying electricity, selling electricity, buying gas. What's the optimal way to produce steam for campus? And he was able to adjust that production in a way that very significantly reduced our overall costs. And again, that all gets baked into then our utility pricing for what it costs us to literally get utilities, steam, electrical, et cetera, out to campus. We also recently have put in place, and this is, I don't know whether I should have made this blue or orange because it's kind of right at the edge of being implemented, or it's just implemented, Tony? This morning, okay, this morning it should go from orange to blue. We are serving as a standby power feed to BPA. Basically, in the summer months when they might need additional power, we are going to be one of their standby locations. We get money for providing that standby service, as well as if they end up using it, then we get money beyond what it costs us to generate that power. So it enables us to use a resource and to basically use it to recoup some funds. And then finally, this last one, it's a little bit different, but I still stuck it in here. This one is interesting because it affects us both from a dollars efficiency standpoint and an environmental standpoint in terms of reducing waste. We have a number of steam pipes, miles and miles of steam pipes that run under campus to deliver, again, energy to different buildings. The insulation needed to be improved in those, and we figured out that we could get in there, do the work, which is an upfront cost to improve the insulation, but then we'd see significant savings because over time we'd see less energy dissipate in terms of being lost. And so it's a little bit different in that I want to be clear there is an investment up front, but the way that the numbers are working out, it's about a 5 to 8 year payback period on the initial investment, and then the insulation will last for 25 to 30 years, and we'll continue to see the benefits. So it has a joint benefit of both helping us on the economic bottom line, but also helping with reducing energy production because we lose less as it's transported. Okay. I'm getting the signal to go faster. I'm going to go faster. All right, next area. If anyone has questions, please jump in, but I'm getting the wave. Property and insurance, another area that we've had, again, teams of people that have done tremendous work that really is helping us. This is something I think we did talk about in this board. A number of years ago, we did make the decision when we separated from OUS. We did make the decision to go with our own independent insurance program rather than use Permit, which is shared services for all the campuses. The reason we did that, we had a consultant come in, and because of our scale economies and the fact that we have our own risk team, it was just a lot more effective for us to do that. We could actually reduce our premium pricing on insurance and then also not have to pay for 2 layers of administration. And so we did establish our own team. We worked with a broker. The pricing, we had this consultant report that said you're going to save a lot of money. I'm always nervous. Then you go out to the market. Turns out, yes, you saved a lot of money. So we were able to both reduce our premium payments and also get better coverage in certain cases for property. So that was a real win for us. Additionally, we have a terrific risk team. Andre's going to be here later today to talk to you about what we're doing on the risk front. One of the benefits of having a terrific risk management team is our insurer on the liability side is actually willing to give us reductions in premium if we can demonstrate that we're taking certain steps to reduce risks on campus. We've had a terrific partnership with them. We get something like a 5 or 6% discount on insurance. That, again, helps us. It adds to the bottom line. This next one is very confusing, and I'll try to do it as quickly as possible. And Craig's here to tell me when I say something wrong. So when we went through the governance transition, for a couple of years, the way some of the state legislation was being interpreted, when we leased buildings from private landlords, they were no longer getting the tax exemption that was previously available to us as a public entity. And so we actually had a very hard and difficult set of analysis and negotiations that was led by Craig in our general counsel's office, but also there was a team of folks we have real estate people and we have a tax analyst in business affairs, and they all worked really hard with the Department of Revenue to get that interpretation turned around so that basically when we are operating out of a building that's owned by a private landlord, they can now apply for a tax exemption as long as they pass it through to us. That had a $350,000 swing on our real estate costs. So by really pushing that issue, we originally were told, no, you're no longer eligible, you have to pay this, and we did pay it for several years. By pushing that issue, we were able to get it reversed, and we were able to then get the benefit of that in terms of reducing what had been, our leasing costs went up, and then they came back down. And then finally, you've been involved in this, so I won't spend that much time, but we have looked opportunistically at times when we can use the foundation as a partner, where we have an operation like White Stag, where we know we're going to be there for the long term. We're in a lease where the lease costs are escalating. By working with the foundation in this case, they purchased the property. You all were part of approved this transaction. They purchased the property, and then what we agreed to was we set a payment to the foundation was that at our current lease costs, so we avoid the continuing escalation into the future. And then once they've paid off the debt on the building, they gift it to us. So that was a terrific partnership. We've done that for a couple of buildings and seen significant savings. Talk a little bit about restructuring and process improvement. One of the areas that we've done this is our printing and mailing shop. We did make a couple of changes there in the last year. One is that we did decide to outsource our offset printing operations. So these are the big Heidelberg presses. It just wasn't cost effective for us to continue to operate that. We could get cheaper pricing off campus. When we did that, we also restructured the administrative structure and shrunk it down for printing and mailing. And overall, it was about a $300,000 a year savings if you count the operations, plus the restructuring, plus the lower costs that we could get by purchasing these services off campus. I mentioned earlier that this concept of shared services, we're starting to experiment with it in a number of places. The basic idea, and VPFA is my portfolio where we're starting to do this. I had a bunch of departments where they might have a person who does finance and a little bit of HR and then maybe an IT person. Rather than have individual people out in isolated offices, we're experimenting with pulling them together into one business team. So you have one team of people that's providing those services, and then they can cross-train, they can develop standardized reports. I think over time there may be efficiencies in terms of staffing. I'm experimenting with it. AAA, which is now the College of Design, is actually doing this with the School of Journalism. They have managed to come up with a shared services operation. They had some vacancies, and they were able to continue operations without refilling those, so they saw some actual staff savings. So it's a great model that we're looking at in a lot of different parts of the university. Again, culture change. Everything on this page is like culture change, because when you do the shared services, there are local people who say, well, you just took my blank person away from me. And the idea is, no, we're trying to provide those services, we're just trying to provide it differently. But I will say that this can upset people in different areas because they view it as their person is no longer their person. So there's big culture change around this. Speaking of culture change, these are two that you are aware of that I just put TBDs on because it's too early, I think, to try to identify concrete costs, but we are in the process of centralizing both communications and IT to look at how we can provide those services more effectively. And then finally, something you may or may not know, in a number of areas of the university, we're trying to get away from paper-based processes and get to online processes. Probably the best example of this is HR. Up until last year, if you wanted to apply for a job at the University of Oregon, it was a paper-based process. We are now completely online with the recruiting process in terms of both accepting applications and then for the search committees to review all that material and proceed forward to the approval and contracting stage. We're doing that in a lot of different areas where we're experimenting with tools and trying to move paper-based processes online. Okay, finally, Treasury operations. I believe this is finally the last one. We've done a couple of things. I mentioned that we refinanced some legacy debt. We are going to see this as one-time money, and it'll come in over 20 years. But this is the savings from what we were paying out of our internal bank to our different bondholders, and what we will see. There's about $7.6 million. But again, it's going to flow in slowly over 20 years.
Which debt was it?
This was legacy debt that we held in our internal bank, and then we would give out, for different auxiliaries, we would have different projects. This is not the arena bond, if that's what you're wondering. It's legacy debt that was through F-bond debt that was through the state, but not the one that I know is probably on your mind. It's not. That was not callable. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then finally, this one you're very aware of, and I just put an estimate, which I think is probably low over the long term, but now that we have the ability to invest our assets in long-term assets, equities and long-term investments, we do think over time that we should see an increase in returns, and I think $1 to $2 million is probably low, but again, I was trying to be conservative. So I mentioned that not everything is kind of traditional cost savings. We do have some other things we've done that have impacted our E&G funds, and I want to just highlight them for you, even though they're kind of like apples and oranges, so it's a little bit different. The first two are times when we've been able to get increased funding from the state. So the top one is a great example. We went to the state, we got a little over $1 million to deal with an emergency to a tunnel that went under Franklin. Well, it turned out the capital project went really well, and we didn't spend all the money. We had a couple $100,000 left over. We had another tunnel emergency where we had a fire a couple of years ago in one of our tunnels. So we went back to the state and basically asked and got permission to take those funds we didn't use and to use them for this other project instead of our own funds. So good example of where we would have had to use our own funds. The other issue up here is just last session, not this session, we were successful getting a significant increase to our deferred maintenance money, which was very impactful for our campus. So this is the money that goes to repair roofs, elevators, sprinkler systems, HVAC systems. We often have to spend our own money on these things when they're emergencies if we don't have state funding. And last session, we were able to get a very significant increase. We went from getting $4 million a year to $8 million a year. I don't know where we're going to land this year. As a group, the universities asked for a higher level of funding. I don't know what we'll end up getting through the legislative session. And then finally, this one again is a little complicated, but today, the way our finances are set up, if you have auxiliary operations, so this would be housing, SRC, health center, athletics, we expect them to price their products and services so that they pay for all their costs, and then we do charge them overhead because they use central services. They use the HR system and finance and GC's office and all these things. A number of years ago, we actually put in what I think is a better way to assess the overhead, which is we created cost pools of what are the services that they're actually using, and then we based the charges based on the actual costs. This past year, we did go through an assessment process to look at those cost pools because we set it up so every 3 to 4 years we'd reassess the rates. And we did determine that we needed to raise the rates. And so we are raising rates for auxiliary service centers, et cetera, by 5% a year for the next 2 years. That money then will come back into the E&G fund and can help us with the E&G budget. The idea is if we don't charge the auxiliaries, then we're doing a cross-subsidization from the E&G fund budget to the auxiliary budget. So it's a little bit different. It's not a cost savings. It's a better accounting that does end up helping the E&G fund budget. And then finally, budget cuts. We talked about this quickly. This is just a rundown of kind of last year's cuts as well as some of the cuts we're looking at this year due to the situation with the budget for next year. So it gives you kind of an overview. If you look at all of this, if you add up everything that falls into the kind of cost savings bucket, what we're looking at is somewhere between $4.5 to $5.5 million annually recurring. And then we also have just under $9 million of one-time savings. That is about, when the president referenced this earlier, last year when we did the 2% admin cut, we kind of put a stake in the ground saying we'd try to find another 3% of efficiency savings. That is roughly, this represents kind of 3 to 4% efficiency savings on the admin budgets. If you look at it from a timing perspective, a lot of that has already been achieved. So this is where I have to put in my caveat that while we still need to find $4 million of cost cuts, we can't say, oh, we just found it here, because a lot of this has already been achieved and incorporated into budgets and prevented us from being in a worse situation. There is some that's still coming. The big chunk of that is actually the Treasury stuff, which is going to be probably a number of years out, but there are still more opportunities, and we're continuing to look for opportunities. So this is just a snapshot. But overall, again, kind of that $4.5 to $5.5 million range. If you add in these other actions and the budget cuts, I mean, you're looking at very sizable action that we've taken over these couple of years. When you add up everything, and this includes what's happened in the schools and colleges, what's happened on the admin side, we're looking at north of $20 million if you add all these things together. So it is significant. And that's after we've done the full $9 million for next year, just to be clear. So that's just want to give you a flavor. Again, I think a lot of people are out there, and I'm confident that there's people out there that if they hear this presentation will say, oh, she didn't include my thing, because I know there's stuff that people are doing to try to save money that I didn't catch. But I just want you to know there's a lot of activity that we're trying to put in it, because again, the more we can do here, a lot of the things I showed you are not positions. They're that other stuff that we're trying to figure out how to be more efficient with.
Bravo.
Yeah, yay.
I know that was super
this
fast.
has been tough, but, you just have to really applaud the staff and also the direction, because what it sounds like is that there's, mean, I'm sure there's been some pain involved with this, and I don't want to diminish that, but it does feel like it's in line with how we want this university to move, and so I don't, congratulations. I mean, I don't know if I say that I'm being insensitive to someone, but I think it's. I'm sorry
No,
to just
that's
jump
quite
in
all
there.
right, but I'm sure the cultural adjustment is taking time, but stick with it.
Yep.
Kurt?
I too want to say thanks. I think this is absolutely an important direction for us to have gone. So thank you to you and all the leaders on campus who've been involved in it. I also want to thank you for actually giving us an accounting breakdown of this, because I think that's very helpful for not just for the board, but for people on campus to see what's being done and how there are efforts being made to be more efficient and save money. I also appreciate the fact that a lot of this involves things like renegotiating contracts and purchasing, so it doesn't involve people. But my question is there some way to quantify the impact this has had on people and positions? Now, you said earlier that the stuff over the last year, so maybe under the budget cuts, the 2% admin cut and the CAS cut from last year was about 130, 140 people.
Yeah.
Is there any way to then look at numbers of people likely to be involved through the spring's budget cuts or with the larger picture?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things. So the last year was around 130 people. Now, I will say a lot of those positions were in CAS, and they were part-time NTTF. So that's head count. That's number of people affected. Some of those people might be at 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, those kinds of things. This year, we're still in progress, so it's hard for me. The 1%, the admin cut that we're doing, which is about 1.6 million, is still in progress, and we won't be at a point of even talking to affected people for months, because we have to go through the process of approvals, and then HR has to review things, and it takes some time to make sure that we're doing it carefully. These things that I'm talking about, at this stage, none of the only numbers I can think of that I put up that actually, at this stage, deal with people, once you get past the budget cut stuff, the only one I can think of is
There was the offset printing.
the offset printing affected people, absolutely. And the AAA, SOJC, I think those were vacant positions, but they affected positions and opportunities for people. Centralized IT, that stuff, I think we're just too early. I mean, I don't mean to not answer your question, but I think I'm not answering your question because I don't think I have data for you at this point. But this was trying to emphasize more of the things we were doing that was impacting S&S more, but sometimes also affecting people.
I guess to me that would be one addition to make to the project here, is to be able to try and say something about number of people or number of positions impacted, because I think that's also information that is useful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Point taken. And it is really hard. I'll just keep going back to it. I mean, 80% of our budget is people. When you get in schools and colleges, it's even higher because they're not paying for utilities and all that stuff. So they're at something like 85%. So it is very hard to make budget cuts without affecting people. It's really hard.
Just the
what's
information
remarkable
is helpful for people to have, I think.
Yeah.
What's remarkable is you've been able to make this significant of budget cuts without cutting a significant number of people. That's, I think,
Well, we've
given
tried to
how
look,
much.
at the opportunities for what's there.
So.
Thank you. The last item is another action item, and it's authorization of a fiscal year 2018 budget, actually a temporary budget, because as with prior years, we don't yet understand the full scope of revenue coming in. In particular, the state appropriation hasn't yet been approved. So in order to operate, to start off the year, we need a budget in place. And Jamie's got a proposal in the book, essentially rolling forward the 2017 budget with a inflation factor of 3%, but I'll let Jamie take over.
Yeah, so we are in, this is a similar position, if you remember, that we were in 2 years ago when we're in this part of the cycle where we don't yet know what our state appropriation is going to be. We are starting bargaining with some of our labor unions, so those issues are open. We also don't yet know what our PEB rate is going to be for next year, and as people have said, in this year in particular, we also have a lot of uncertainty about enrollment because of things going on. So what we're proposing to you is what we did 2 years ago, which is at this point to authorize us to continue to spend the same spending level as last year. So it's kind of a continuing authorization with the idea that, I shouldn't say the idea, with the plan that in September, once some of these numbers, not all of them, but some of these numbers are more concrete, then we will come back with much more specific projections for an expenditure authorization. But technically, I believe the board has to approve something for next year for us to continue to operate. And so the proposal is the same one you saw 2 years ago at this point in the cycle, which is to continue forward with basically last year's budget on both the operating and the capital side.
Any other discussion, questions?
So, Jamie, when would you anticipate then bringing the missing pieces back to us, and would we do that via conference call? I think that's what we did previously.
I think, I'm looking at Angela, were we?
We'll do it in September.
In the September meeting, yeah. I think was when we were thinking we'd have most of the pieces. At that point, we'll still have some missing pieces potentially, but we'll be in a position to lock down some numbers. So.
Okay.
And the resolutions.
The resolutions, page 43 to 44. So no other questions. We need a motion.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Any other business to come before the...
I'd just like to raise a general comment. I don't think we've kept any statistics or anything, but, you know, looking back historically when we, quote unquote, got independence from the higher ed, and you listen to the process both in our earlier committee and what I've heard today, I think there's some tremendous culture change and a lot of good things are happening. And I guess the question, maybe the concern, are we kind of documenting that thing and telling our story outside of this room? And especially when we see situations with the HEC starting to build their staff and whatever, you're starting to see this creeping, what I would call it, I don't want to use the word paralysis, but, you know, the reestablishment of that central control. And I just think there's a great story here. I realize we're raising tuition, and I think the point that Ann brought up earlier is our challenge. But by the same token, if we weren't doing the job and we weren't independent, think of where we would be. I just think this is a great story that we need to somehow get out to the public. I don't think they understand or appreciate it.
I agree. It's a really good point.
Yeah, thank you, Al. I mean, you know, one of the things is, you know, a lot of this happens without it. I mean, this is one of the reasons we wanted to bring it to the board, because I know that a lot of you have concerns, particularly I think some folks who are in the private sector sort of start with the idea probably a government body isn't going to be terribly efficient and isn't changeable and isn't looking for new solutions. But, you know, we are, and the work is being done. And, you know, I think that and it's not just here, right? We saw yesterday at Scott's going away party, all the changes that we're making and the changes in governance. And, you know, I don't know if we're effectively telling the story, partly because we're sort of halfway through it. I mean, this is, the new board, the new structure. This is a story that's in progress. And part of the issue is, you know, we have to deal with these episodic problems along the way that get more press than the progress side of the story. And so I think that we could probably do a better job of that, and maybe we need to think about how we can get that across, because I don't think the people of the state have a sense about, you know, the progress that we're making. They probably hear more about the issues that occur, and so I think that we could do a better job at that. But, you know, for us as a board, or for you as a board, I think that, you know, one of the things I think is important, and I'm glad that what you said, because the work is being done by, you know, I get a lot of people say really nice things to me, and some people say some not nice things to me. But I get the compliments. But people like Jamie, you know, people like Craig, Kevin, they generally don't get the positive statements, and so I think it's very useful that we recognize that we are doing these things, and they deserve a lot of praise.
This is not the kind of story that's easy to actually get out, especially if you're telling it about yourself. It tends to be not a story that gets into the media. However, it seems to me that in our dealings, especially with our alumni and with our corporate relationships and in our fundraising relationships, that this is a story that we could tell if we were able to think about how to verbalize it. I think it's the idea that there has become, that we've taken up a kind of this efficiency model, that's this sort of streamlining, this much more competitive stance that we're in. To use the football analogy of how Chip had us, had our players smaller and faster, and that's essentially the sort of, it goes right into sort of the earlier aspirational statements about how we wanted as a board to be part of a renaissance for this university, and how in choosing you, we were wanting to jumpstart that, and the decisions that Chuck has led us towards has really focused us in that way. And this idea of figuring out how do we talk about this amongst ourselves? How do we then talk about this with those key relationships? And I think that's how this story gets out. It's very hard to get, as you talk about a newspaper or someone to sort of talk about how great we are. Their focus needs to be generally on how we're not great, because that's how it works. But there is no way. But there is a way for us to, as long as we can figure out how we want to tell it. And I think that would be my thoughts about the question you just asked, which I think is the right question.
If I could, I would like to second what Alan was saying. I don't know the best process for getting it out, but I think this is a very important point if we can make it more clearly. There's clearly a perception out there on the part of many people that the University of Oregon is bloated in some way. There is clearly a perception out there that we want more money to invest to improve the university. If we can also get part of that discussion to be the fact that we are looking to be more efficient, we're looking to be innovative, we are saving a certain dollars amount, I think that is helpful to us in the public. I think that's a great point.
Okay. Well, thank you. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.